"Don't come near my son," she said, her voice low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't shake even when it was breaking. "I don't care what your face looks like. I care what you did." Brent Hollis hadn't expected that. Most people flinched when they first saw him. They looked away, or they stared too long, or they said something like, "Oh, it's not that bad," in a way that meant the exact opposite. But this woman, standing in the doorway of room 14B at St. Augustine's pediatric ward, arms crossed, eyes locked on him, wasn't looking at the burns on the left side of his face at all. She was looking at him like he was someone who had done something wrong. And he hadn't even said a word yet. He held up both hands. The folder he'd been carrying slipped and landed flat on the linoleum floor between them. "I'm the new social services liaison," he said. "Brent Hollis. I have a meeting scheduled with. I know who you are." She didn't move from the doorway. "I got the email. I also got the one before that, where the last person said my son's case was being reassigned for the 3rd time in 4 months. She said reassigned the way people said excuses. "So you'll forgive me if I don't roll out the welcome mat." Her name was Cassie Sheridan. He'd read the file twice on the drive over. 34 years old, single mother. Her son, Arlo, was 7 and had been in and out of St. Augustine since he was 4, a rare autoimmune condition that flared without warning and hospitalized him for weeks at a time. She'd quit her job as a paralegal 18 months ago to be closer to Arlo during the bad stretches. She was now working part-time remotely, managing billing for a small dental practice, making just enough to keep the apartment. The file said she had no family nearby. The file said she had been cooperative with previous caseworkers. The file did not say what her eyes looked like when she was trying to decide whether to trust someone. He bent down and picked up the folder. "I understand," he said. 3 reassignment in 4 months that shouldn't have happened, and I'm not going to stand here and defend it." He looked at her directly, the way he'd trained himself to do years ago when he first came back from the burn center, when every mirror felt like an ambush. "I just want to meet Arlo, and I want to help if you'll let me." Something shifted in her expression, not softened, just recalibrated. She studied him for another moment, then stepped aside. Arlo was sitting up in the hospital bed with a drawing pad on his lap, working on something with a blue crayon. He had his mother's same dark eyes, and a gravity that seemed too heavy for a 7-year-old. The gravity of a kid who had spent a lot of time in rooms that smelled like antiseptic, and had learned to find normal in that. He looked up when Brent walked in and did exactly what most kids did. Stared straight at the burned side of his face without any of the adult pretense of not staring. "What happened to your face?" Arlo asked. "Arlo." Cassie's voice carried a warning. "It's all right." Brent pulled the chair from the corner and sat down at eye level. "I was in a fire when I was 26. My left side got burned pretty bad. It healed, but it kept the scars." Arlo considered this with the seriousness of a scientist. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore. It did for a long time. Mine hurts sometimes," Arlo said, glancing down at the IV line in his right arm. "Inside, though. You can't see it." "Yeah," Brent said quietly. "That kind is harder to explain to people." Arlo looked up again, reassessing. Then he held out the drawing pad. He'd been drawing a truck, a big red one with enormous wheels. "Do you like trucks?" "I like trucks," Brent said. Arlo nodded, satisfied. He turned back to his drawing. Cassie, standing near the window, said nothing, but Brent caught the way she exhaled, slow and careful, like someone setting down something they'd been carrying for a long time. He came back the next Thursday. He wasn't required to. The initial meeting was done. He could have sent the intake notes through the system and scheduled a follow-up in 2 weeks, like the protocol said. But something about the file had stuck with him. Not the medical parts, not the bureaucratic complexity of Arlo's case. It was the line near the bottom, under additional notes, added by the previous caseworker and never followed up on. Mother reports difficulty attending required county review appointments due to transportation issues. No resolution documented. Transportation issues. In a city with a functional bus system and 3 different rideshare apps. Brent had spent enough time in social services to know what that actually meant. It meant the caseworker had noted it and moved on, and Cassie had been quietly failing to meet requirements she didn't have the resources to meet, and nobody had bothered to bridge that gap. He'd made 2 phone calls. That was all it had taken. When he told Cassie about the medical transport voucher program he'd enrolled Arlo in, she went very still. "That exists," she said. "It's not well advertised. You'd be surprised what exists and just never gets communicated." She sat with that for a moment. They were in the small family consultation room down the hall. Institutional chairs, a round table, a window that looked out onto a parking structure. Arlo was back in his room watching a nature documentary with the volume low. "The last person," Cassie said carefully, "told me the wait list for anything like that was 18 months. That's for the residential program. This is outpatient transport, different fund, different wait list. You should have been enrolled 7 months ago." She looked out the window. Her jaw tightened and released. "Okay," she said finally. "Not thank you. Not that's wonderful. Just okay, the way you said it when you had learned not to celebrate things until they actually happened." Brent understood that too. He started coming by on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. He told himself it was case management, follow through. The kind of consistent presence that actually mattered in situations like Arlo's. And that was true. It was also true that Thursday at 2 was when Cassie took her lunch break and sat in the family lounge with a sandwich she'd packed from home and a terrible cup of vending machine coffee, and had approximately 45 minutes where she wasn't needed by anyone. He started bringing decent coffee from the place 2 blocks south. The first time she looked at the cup like it might be a trick. "It's just coffee," he said. "It's never just coffee," she said. But she took it. They talked about Arlo mostly. His treatment progress, upcoming appointments, what the doctors were cautiously optimistic about. Brent was careful to keep it professional. He was aware, in a way he hadn't been aware of anything in a long time, of the exact distance between their chairs, of the way she laughed when something actually struck her as funny, sudden and brief, like she wasn't expecting to do it. He was also aware that she had a lot of walls. They weren't unfriendly walls. They were the kind built by someone who'd been let down in orderly succession and had gotten very efficient at construction. One Thursday in early March, she asked him about the fire. She didn't ask directly. Cassie almost never asked anything directly, he'd noticed. She said, "Arlo keeps asking me about it. He wants to know if you were scared. Were you scared?" Brent said. She smiled at that just slightly. "He's 7. He needs a narrative." Brent leaned back in his chair and looked at the acoustic tile ceiling. "I was a structural engineer. We were on a site inspection. A building that was supposed to have been cleared. Something in the electrical hadn't been properly shut down. There was a gas line." He paused. "I got 3 of my crew out. The 4th one didn't make it. Cassie didn't say I'm sorry, or that must have been so hard. The things people said when they didn't know what else to say." She said, "Is that why you switched? Switched to social services?" "Yeah." He thought about it honestly. Partly. Partly I needed to do something where I felt like." He stopped. "Where the outcome wasn't already decided by the structure of the thing." He shook his head. "That probably doesn't make sense." "It makes complete sense," she said. The call came on a Wednesday night in April. Brent was home, standing in his kitchen eating leftover pasta directly from the container, when his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. Mr. Hollis. The voice was male, unhurried, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. "My name is Wendell Causey. I'm Cassie Sheridan's brother-in-law, her late husband's brother." Brent set down the container. "Okay. I understand you've been spending quite a bit of time at St. Augustine's. With my nephew. I'm Arlo's case manager, yes, of course." A pause. "I also understand you've been taking a personal interest in the situation. Coffee. Vouchers. Going beyond what's typically required." Brent waited. "I want you to understand something," Wendell said. "My brother left a life insurance policy. Cassie has contested the disbursement. This is an ongoing legal matter. And if it appears to a judge that she has been receiving personal assistance from a county employee, it creates a conflict of interest narrative that her legal team would be very foolish not to use." The line was quiet for a moment. "Are you calling to threaten me?" Brent asked. I'm calling to inform you, Wendell said pleasantly. I think that's the more accurate framing. The call ended. Brent stood in his kitchen for a long time. The pasta had gone cold. Outside his window, the neighborhood was the usual Wednesday night quiet. A car going by. Someone's dog barking twice and stopping. He thought about what Cassie had told him 2 weeks ago. That Arlo's medical costs over the past 3 years had put her nearly $60,000 in debt, and that the insurance money, $240,000 that her husband had specifically intended for Arlo's care, had been frozen in a dispute over a beneficiary form that Wendell claimed had been improperly filed. $60,000 in debt, a frozen inheritance, a kid in and out of the hospital, and a man she'd never met calling county employees on a Wednesday night to issue polite threats, he thought. This is the structure of the thing. And then he thought about what he'd said to Cassie about wanting to work somewhere. The outcome wasn't already decided. He didn't say anything to Cassie. Not immediately. He needed to understand what he was working with first. He spent 3 evenings that week in the county records system, and 2 more on the phone with a colleague who'd spent years in child welfare law before moving into administrative oversight. What he learned was this. The beneficiary dispute wasn't as solid as Wendell was presenting it. The form in question had a documentation trail, submitted correctly, witnessed, date stamped. The improperly filed claim relied on a fax transmission record from the insurance company's own systems that had an irregular gap. A gap that a forensic accountant had apparently flagged, and that Wendell's legal team had successfully argued was the result of server migration rather than anything deliberate. But the transmission log existed, and the person who had authorized the server migration at the insurance company's regional office had been, until 8 months before the dispute began, employed by a firm that Wendell's company had contracted extensively. It was not a smoking gun, but it was a thread. Brent was not a lawyer. He was clear on that. What he was, however, was a former structural engineer who had spent the better part of a career understanding how systems failed, where the pressure points were, what happened when load-bearing elements were documented incorrectly. He knew what a thread looked like when it was worth pulling. He made a call to a legal aid organization that handled insurance disputes. He gave them the case number, not Cassie's name. He described the documentation trail. The attorney on the other end was quiet for a moment, then said, "Who's the forensic accountant who flagged it?" Brent told her. Another pause. "He's good," she said. "If he flagged it, there's something there. Can you get me the transmission log?" "It's part of the case record. Cassie would have to request it. Then she should request it. Today, if possible." He went to the hospital the next Thursday. Cassie was in the family lounge with her sandwich and her bad coffee. Except today, she'd also brought a small container of grapes that she was eating one at a time, while scrolling through something on her phone with the expression of a person reading something they would rather not be reading. He set the good coffee down. She looked up. "You have your work face on," she said. "I have information," he said, "about the insurance case." Her whole body changed. Not dramatically. Cassie didn't do dramatic. But the careful stillness she maintained most of the time shifted into something more guarded. "That's not your," she started. "I know it's not my area." He sat down. "I want to tell you what I found, and then it's yours to do whatever you want with it. I'm not going to push you anywhere you don't want to go." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the grapes aside and said, "Okay, tell me." He told her everything. The transmission log, the server migration, the flagged irregularity, the connection between the insurance company employee and Wendell's business network. He told her about the legal aid attorney. He told her about the thread. Cassie listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, her eyes not leaving his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He called you, didn't he?" she said. It wasn't a question. Brent said nothing. "That's why you're telling me now." She wasn't angry, exactly. She was reading him the way she had the day in the doorway of Arlo's room. Recalibrating. "Wendell called you and told you to back off, and instead you spent a week building me a case file. I spent a week understanding the situation." Brent. His name in her mouth, the first time she'd used it without the slightly ironic formality she'd kept in the early weeks. That's the same thing. He didn't argue. She picked up the coffee cup, held it in both hands. Outside, the parking structure was doing its usual gray business. He's been doing this for 2 years, she said quietly. Since the day after the funeral. Every time I get close to something, there's a call or a letter or something. She shook her head. He has more money than I do and he can afford to wait me out. That's what his attorney told my attorney, essentially in a deposition, that they were prepared to wait. He didn't count on the transmission log, Brent said. He also didn't count on me having someone who knows how to read it. They sat with that. I'm going to call the attorney, Cassie said finally. The legal aid one. Can you send me the name? Already in your inbox. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not the carefully recalibrated assessment she'd been doing for months, but something else. Something that had stopped measuring. Why? She said, simply. He thought about the honest answer. He thought about Wendell's call, and the 3 crew members he'd gotten out of the building, and Arlo asking if he'd been scared, and the way Cassie's voice had sounded the first day in the doorway, steady even when breaking. Because the outcome shouldn't already be decided, he said. The legal aid attorney's name was Rosalind Fitch, and she had, in her own words, been waiting for a case like this for 6 years. What happened next was not fast. Nothing in legal proceedings is fast, and Brent had been in social services long enough not to promise timelines. But within 3 weeks of Cassie's formal request for the transmission log, Rosalind had filed a motion that caused Wendell's legal team to request, for the first time in 2 years, a continuance. They're scared, Rosalind told Cassie on the phone, and Brent heard this secondhand from Cassie herself, who relayed it in the family lounge the following Thursday with something he hadn't heard in her voice before. A cautious, almost disbelieving lightness. She said, "They're scared," Cassie repeated. She said continuances are what you do when you need time to renegotiate your position. That sounds right, Brent said. She looked out the window. Arlo had a good week, she said. His counts are the best they've been since December. She paused. He asked about you. He wanted to know if you were coming Thursday. I'm here on Thursday. He made you something. She reached into the tote bag beside her chair and produced a drawing carefully folded, the fold itself deliberate in the way 7-year-olds fold things when they consider them important. Brent unfolded it. A red truck, and beside it a figure with curly hair and a face that was half orange. The scars, rendered in crayon with the accuracy of a child who paid genuine attention, standing next to a smaller figure with dark eyes. Under the drawing in careful first-grade letters, Brent and Arlo. He sat with it for a moment. The trucks, the orange crayon, his name spelled just slightly wrong. He's a good kid, Brent said. He is, Cassie agreed. She was watching him with an expression he didn't entirely know how to read, quieter than her usual guardedness, less architecture in it. You know he keeps telling the nurses you're his friend. Not his mom's caseworker. His friend. Am I overstepping? No. She said it without hesitation, which was itself something. Cassie almost never said anything without at least a half-second of careful deliberation. No, you're. She stopped, started again. I want to say something and I want you to know it's not easy for me to say things like this. He waited. I stopped expecting anyone to actually show up, she said. Not dramatically. Just over time. The caseworkers who got reassigned. The family that had their own lives. His dad's family, who turned out to want the money more than they wanted Arlo to be okay. She looked down at her hands around the coffee cup. I got very efficient at handling things myself. I thought I'd gotten good at it. You had, Brent said. But you can be good at something and still be exhausted by it. She looked up. I'm tired, Brent. I have been for a long time. And I didn't know how tired until someone started. She gestured. A small and unfinished gesture that seemed to mean this, all of this, the coffee and the phone calls, and Thursday at 2 o'clock. Until someone started just showing up. The family lounge hummed its fluorescent hum. Down the hall, the pediatric ward was doing its quiet afternoon business. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him for a moment with that recalibrated, unmeasuring expression. Then she said, quietly, "Okay," and picked up her coffee. And he understood that from Cassie, okay was not a small word. Wendell's team did not renegotiate. They capitulated. It took 4 more months and 2 more motions and a forensic accounting report that Rosalind described as the cleanest example of insurance record manipulation I have seen in 15 years of practice. But in late August, a settlement was reached. The full $240,000, plus accrued interest, plus legal fees. Brent heard about it on a Tuesday. Cassie texted him. Rosalind called. It's over. He stood in the hallway of the county building where he worked, holding his phone, reading those 4 words. Around him, the usual Tuesday afternoon traffic of social services offices, files, voices, the distant ring of a desk phone. He thought about Arlo's medical debt. He thought about 7 months of Thursdays. He thought about the transmission log that a caseworker with no business looking at insurance documents had looked at. Anyway, because he'd been an engineer long enough to know that every system has a pressure point, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is understand where it is. He texted back, "That's great news." "How's Arlo?" Her reply came fast. "Good. He's having a good day. He says he wants to show you something on Thursday." "I'll be there," he wrote. On the Thursday after the settlement, Arlo showed him a new drawing. This one was more ambitious. A whole scene, done in multiple colors with the kind of committed energy that only children and certain artists bring to paper. There was a hospital, blocky and large. There was a red truck. There were several stick figures of varying heights, all rendered with the seriousness of an official document. "That's you," Arlo said, pointing to the tallest figure with the orange crayon face. "And that's me. And that's Mom." He pointed to the figure in the middle, which had been given particularly careful dark eyes. "And this," he pointed to the truck, "is for when I get out. Mom says we're going to do a real road trip to see the national parks." "Which one first?" Brent asked. Arlo considered this with his scientist gravity. "All of them," he said. "In order." Brent looked up from the drawing. Cassie was leaning against the window frame, arms loosely crossed, watching them. The afternoon light was doing something to the room, making it warmer than hospital rooms usually were, less institutional. She met his eyes and she smiled. Not the brief, surprised smile she'd had in the early months. A real one. The kind that knew what it was doing. "He means it," she said. "About the road trip." "I don't doubt it," Brent said. Arlo was already reaching for another crayon. "You could come," he said, with the offhand certainty of a 7-year-old who had decided the matter and considered it settled. "There are a lot of parks." Brent looked at Cassie. Cassie raised an eyebrow, the half-amused, half-questioning expression he'd come to know as her version of well. "There are a lot of parks," Brent agreed. Arlo nodded, satisfied, and went back to his drawing. Cassie looked out the window at the parking structure, which was gray and ordinary and completely unremarkable. She was still smiling. Some doors you don't notice opening. You're just one Thursday on the other side of them.